It's one of the longest, loudest arguments in modern history, a fight that outlived revolutions, toppled empires, bankrupted superpowers, and split the world in half. For over a century, capitalism and socialism weren't just economic theories, they were battle lines. And behind every patriotic speech, every worker uprising, every recession, and every proxy war, this debate shaped the world we live in. But here's the part no ideology influencer ever mentions. Neither system worked the way the textbooks promised. Not once, not anywhere. And when the pressure hit, war, famine, inflation, collapse, the truth showed itself with brutal clarity. Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history. And remember, simple is never easy. The story begins long before anyone uttered the words capitalism or socialism. For most of human history, the economy wasn't really an economy at all. It was survival. Monarchs claimed divine right. Landlords owned almost everything. Peasants produced just enough to avoid starving. For thousands of years, human life was a zero-sum game. If someone rose, someone else fell. Wealth came from land, labor, and war. Then, the Industrial Revolution blew the world open. Britain in the late 1700s was a pressure cooker of coal, iron, capital, and restless ambition. Machines replaced muscle, factories replaced workshops, and a new kind of power emerged, the power of private capital. For the first time, individuals could invest, risk, and own at a scale previously reserved for kings. Productivity exploded, wages rose for some, misery deepened for others, and inequality widened faster than any society had ever experienced. Pollution choked cities, children worked 12-hour shifts, slums bred disease. But one fact was undeniable. Capitalism produced more goods, more wealth, more speed than the world had ever seen. This was the moment when socialism was born, not as a utopian dream, but as a desperate reaction to industrial capitalism's brutality. By the mid-1800s, writers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels looked at the smokestacks, the worker riots, the factory floors stained with sweat and blood, and concluded that the system itself was the crime. They argued that if workers collectively owned the factories, if the profits were shared, if production served human need rather than private gain, society would finally become fair. No more exploitation, no more cycles of boom and bust. It sounded clean, elegant, moral. And for millions of people living beneath the gears of early capitalism, it sounded like justice. But theory is one thing. Real life is another. The first time the world seriously attempted socialism on a national scale, it wasn't in a classroom. It was in the ashes of an empire. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, Lenin inherited a country that was starving, illiterate, and backward. The Tsar was dead, the old elite fled or were executed, and suddenly a vast territory with 150 million people needed a new operating system. So the Soviets built one: state ownership of land, factories, banks, and resources. Prices were set by bureaucrats, production targets replaced profit motives, private business was wiped out. In theory, it should have created perfect equality and efficiency. In practice, it created chaos. Without market prices, planners didn't know what people wanted or how much to produce. Without competition, factories didn't innovate. Without personal reward, workers had no reason to exceed the minimum. Shortages became normal. Lines became culture. Agriculture collapsed into famine. Lenin eventually retreated, allowing limited private trade just to keep the country alive. Yet despite its failures, socialism remained seductive because capitalism wasn't exactly looking good either. By the early 20th century, capitalism had delivered immense growth, but also wild instability. Speculation ran rampant. Trusts dominated industries. The wealthy lived like modern royalty, while millions scraped by. This imbalance detonated in 1929, when the U.S. stock market imploded and capitalism suffered its most catastrophic failure. The Great Depression wasn't a recession, it was a global economic heart attack. Banks collapsed. Unemployment hit 25%. Entire countries saw their financial systems wiped out. For millions of observers, capitalism looked not just flawed, but fatal. So by the 1930s, the world faced an uncomfortable truth. Neither system worked as advertised. Socialism promised equality but delivered scarcity. Capitalism promised prosperity but delivered collapse. And then came the moment that changed everything. World War II. The war forced every major economy to test its system under maximum pressure. The Soviet Union, despite its inefficiencies, mobilized its entire population with terrifying speed. State control allowed it to redirect all resources towards survival. Meanwhile, capitalist nations like the United States transformed into industrial supermachines, proving just how powerful private innovation could be when backed by national coordination. When the war ended, the scoreboard wasn't ideological anymore. It was GDP, infrastructure, growth, and living standards. From 1945 to 1991, the world became a laboratory. On one side, the Soviet bloc, central planning, state control, suppressed markets. On the other, the United States and its allies, regulated capitalism, private enterprise, but with safety nets born from Depression-era lessons. This was the real experiment, not the manifestos, not the speeches, but millions of people living the consequences. The results were as dramatic as they were painful. In the Soviet Union, the early decades brought rapid industrialization. Illiteracy fell, military power soared. But beneath the surface, the system was cracking. Without price signals, the economy drifted into absurd inefficiency. Factories met quotas by producing unusable goods. Farms delivered rotten harvests, and innovation stagnated. By the 1970s, the USSR was decades behind in consumer technology. A country that could build rockets couldn't produce decent refrigerators. Capitalism, meanwhile, adapted. After the Great Depression, governments introduced regulation, deposit insurance, antitrust laws, Social Security, and unemployment benefits. Capitalism didn't become fair, but it became survivable. It learned from its mistakes, and that adaptability became its ultimate weapon. By the 1980s, the gap was undeniable. Western living standards surged while the Soviet economy stalled. The Cold War wasn't won by ideology, it was won by performance. By the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the debate seemed settled. The Soviet Union wasn't defeated by bombs or invasions. It was defeated by empty shelves, broken incentives, and an economy that could no longer keep up. A system designed to eliminate inequality had produced new elites, party bosses, bureaucrats, and insiders, while ordinary citizens waited in line for bread. But capitalism's victory lap didn't last long. By the 1990s and 2000s, capitalism evolved into something no 19th century theorist could have predicted. Finance exploded. Global supply chains stretched across continents. Credit flowed like water. Inequality soared again. This time on a scale reminiscent of the Gilded Age. Corporations became transnational powers, and entire economies became dependent on debt, speculation, and asset bubbles. The 2008 financial crisis hit like déjà vu, a reminder that capitalism's instability never really disappeared. It just came back wearing new clothes. Meanwhile, socialism re-emerged, not in the old Soviet form, but as something softer. Calls for wealth taxes, nationalized healthcare, free education, and stronger unions returned in many countries. This time, almost nobody wanted pure capitalism or pure socialism, because history had made the trade-offs painfully clear. Look at modern Scandinavia, often mislabeled as socialist. These countries have free markets, private enterprise, and global corporations, but they also have high taxes, strong social protections, and powerful unions. It's capitalism with guardrails. Look at China, the most fascinating case of all. Beijing calls it socialism with Chinese characteristics, but what it really resembles is state-directed capitalism. Private firms driving growth, government controlling strategic sectors, markets flourishing only when they serve national priorities. When you step back, the truth is almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Every major economy today is a hybrid, a blend of markets and state power, incentives and protections, freedom, and control. Not because ideologies failed, but because reality forced compromise. When systems met real human behavior, ambition, greed, fear, laziness, creativity, neither theory held up cleanly. Under pure capitalism, greed becomes innovation until it becomes exploitation. Under pure socialism, equality becomes unity until it becomes repression. In markets, power concentrates through wealth. In planned economies, power concentrates through politics. Different systems, same human tendencies. Different propaganda, same flaws. The real question isn't which system is better, it's which system has the best mechanisms to restrain power, correct mistakes, and reward useful behavior. And history's answer is clear. The system that adapts wins. Because the debate was never really about capitalism versus socialism. It was about who controls the levers inside each system: the capital, the state, the banks, the unions, the corporations, the regulators. The real fight is always over the same thing: power. And power, as history shows again and again, doesn't disappear. It just changes hands. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. Its financial system in history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.